Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our media briefing hosted by the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta to announce an over $4.6 million expansion of our partnership in our Vote Your Voice, a voter outreach and civil engagement program. We're here with grassroots activists to raise awareness about efforts to empower and organize communities to vote and make their voices heard in November's elections. Before we begin, we have some housekeeping notes. To start, all attendees have been muted to limit background noise. A question and answer session will be held at the end of the briefing. However, you may pose a question at any point during the briefing by clicking the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. This will open a window where you can type your question. Be sure to include your name and news outlet or affiliation. We may modify or combine questions to cover as many as we can during the Q&A portion. If your question is not answered, please email us at press@splcenter.org. This briefing is being recorded. After the event, all registrants will receive a link to the recording briefing and a written transcript. You may use the information, audio, and footage shared today for your news content with attribution to the appropriate panelists. We don't anticipate any technical difficulties during today's briefing. However, if there are any challenges, our speakers may temporarily go off camera to continue the program. We will have an ASL interpreter on screen at all times. If there is anything we can do to improve access to the presentation, please let us know through the Q&A box. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Leisha Brooks, Chief of Staff and Culture at the Southern Poverty Law Center, who will provide more information on our Vote Your Voice program.
Thank you, Kevin, and welcome to our guests. A special thank you to our panelists for contributing to this important discussion, and most importantly, for all of your work supporting communities across the South to ensure that their voices are heard through the ballot box. The opportunity to elect representatives from our community and have a voice in our government represents one of the most fundamental rights and one of the strongest sources of power in our nation's democracy. It is only through our vote and our voice that we can defend our civil liberties, as well as advocate for equal opportunity and fair treatment for our communities. That is why we are proud to partner with the panelists joining us today. Today's media briefing will focus on the ways grassroots advocates on our panel are mobilizing communities and helping their friends and neighbors get to the polls. These organizations are engaged in impactful activities that help communities exercise their right to vote. They are registering voters, making sure their friends and neighbors can get to the polls, and ensuring their communities have everything they need to make their voices heard. Grassroots community organizations like these are what inspired the SPLC to initiate the Vote Your Voice grant. And they continue to inspire us to expand the program. Vote Your Voice began in 2020 as a partnership between the SPLC and the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta to increase voter registration, voter participation, and civic engagement amongst diverse communities of color across the Deep South. We launched the program by committing to distribute $30 million in grants to diverse grassroots organizations that support voter registration, mobilization, and education. Also, voting rights advocacy, and importantly, voting rights restoration work. We know that direct interaction with friends and neighbors in a community is the best way to increase voter turnout and empower communities to achieve the changes they need. That's why we are pleased to announce an additional increase of over $4.6 million to our Vote Your Voice partnership. These funds will be distributed amongst 39 diverse community organizations. Some organizations are past recipients and will receive continued support, while others are new grantees doing grassroots mobilization. Each is a trusted community partner, deeply engaged at the grassroots level, successfully mobilizing local communities to help them exercise their right to vote. Organizations joining us today are here to share a little bit about their strategies and their activities. First, it is my great pleasure to introduce Frank Fernandez, President and CEO of the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta.
Thank you,
Frank?
Alicia.
Mhm.
I appreciate it. For us, this really begins with this fundamental notion of what can we do to help ensure that everyone has a fair shot at a decent life. That's where we start. And I can't think of anything more fundamental than that in helping ensure that folks' voices heard and their votes are counted. When individuals cast their vote, they're casting their vote for their hopes, their dreams, for access to resources and opportunities for themselves, for their families, and for the communities they call home. And this effort is about our homes across the Deep South. And over the past 3 years through this partnership with the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta has worked to ensure that voters throughout the Deep South were given the chance to exercise their right to vote. One of the things that is really critical for us is that, as we all know, this issue of voting rights has become a very polarizing and partisan issue, but we reject that dynamic. This is a fundamental issue of any person in our community. It is not a right or left, blue or red issue. It is a fundamental issue that is key to everyone's ability to exercise what good life they want to lead. So for us, we have been very happy to partner with SPLC on it. And through this initiative, more than $29 million have been awarded to 75 organizations supporting voter engagement in Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, and Mississippi. This right to vote, as we know, is the cornerstone of our democracy. And we're excited to be partnering with our friends at SPLC on this new round of grants you just heard about. And I get the pleasure of introducing our panel of folks who are leading this important work. And just to give you a quick sense of them, first we have Alabama Forward, whose Shake the Field initiative uses arts and culture to educate and inspire Alabamians to get civically engaged. Asian Americans Advancing Justice, which will use its dollars to increase the number of canvassers, volunteers, and double the counties in which they conduct election protection activities. Excuse me. Engage Miami Civic Foundation, which will expand their outreach to engage 100,000 young people who otherwise might be unlikely to vote. Power Coalition, which will use these funds to support statewide voter mobilization efforts at statewide and municipal runoffs. And last but not least, Southern Echo, which will work to support outreach in 6 additional counties with a particular focus on Mississippi's Latinx population. Thank you to each of these organizations you're going to hear from for doing the hard, important work to make sure that every vote is cast, every vote is heard, and for helping our communities move forward together. So with that, I have the pleasure turning it over to Evan Milligan with Alabama Forward, who's going to get us started.
Thank you, Frank. Hello from Montgomery, Alabama. My name is Evan Milligan, and I serve Alabama Forward as Executive Director. Alabama Forward exists to serve a coalition of over 30 organizations working around the state to protect voting rights for all Alabamians, diversify the electorate, and make democracy more accessible. And we're here to express our appreciation for the support we've received from the Vote Your Voice grant. We're excited about the ongoing collaboration with SPLC and the Atlanta Community Foundation. Alabama Forward started as an idea in 2017. A team of neighbors here in Alabama began meeting on a recurring basis to trade notes about effective civic engagement tactics they observed working across the Deep South. And this group of leaders drew inspiration from groups working across a spectrum of political beliefs and ideologies. This group was inspired by the work of state voices affiliated civic engagement tables like Pro Georgia, Blueprint North Carolina, and the Power Coalition. They dreamed of bringing a similar broad collective approach to voting rights expansion work here in Alabama. And their vision ultimately became Alabama Forward. And since our founding in October of 2020, we have worked to support the training, funding, and coordination of member groups working at the grassroots level across our state to make democracy real. Through our Shake the Field program, we are using popular education tactics to infuse music with relatable and hopeful messages that invite artists and influencers to freshly consider the value of voting this November and beyond. Several of our members and I are plaintiffs in a federal challenge to the congressional map adopted by our state government this past November. The Supreme Court will hear this case about a month from now on October 4th. And many of the groups represented on this call are working with the plaintiffs and supportive groups around the country through Power on the Line, a national effort to connect the argument presented in our litigation to broader civic education and voting rights protection efforts. We are also beginning the development of a leadership development pipeline program focusing on people of color in Alabama who aspire to lead at a grassroots, nonprofit administration, or elected office level. Our people in Alabama need all of our creativity and commitment, and the resources from Vote Your Voice keep our members engaged and help us pursue the innovative strategies needed to meet constantly changing demands on the ground. Now I'll pass it to Phi Nguyen with Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Atlanta.
Thank you so much, Evan. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Phi Nguyen, and I'm the Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Atlanta. We are a nonprofit that's dedicated to protecting and advancing the civil and human rights of Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and other immigrant communities in Georgia, as well as building a Georgia that is fair and equitable for all. Our work includes policy advocacy at this local, state, and federal level, immigration legal services to those at risk of detention and deportation, civic engagement and organizing, and impact litigation. We are so grateful to our partners at SPLC and Community Foundation for investing in our work and the work of many of our community partners. With their support, we will continue to build political power for AAPIs in Georgia in the midterm election cycle and beyond. I want to talk a little bit about the power and impact of the AAPI electorate in Georgia. AAPIs are not only the fastest growing population in Georgia, but we are also the fastest growing electorate. And what our communities know is that the historic outcome of the 2020 election in Georgia would not have happened without us. AAPIs had a record voter turnout of nearly 65% in the 2020 presidential election, notwithstanding the difficulties of the pandemic. And the number of AAPI votes increased by 84% from 2016 to 2020, which represents the highest increase in voters among all racial groups in Georgia. And over 45,000 of those voters were casting their vote for the very first time. Joe Biden's margin of victory in Georgia was only 0.2%. And we also know that other critical elections in Georgia are won by even thinner margins. Our communities are the margin of victory. And though we are relatively tiny, we are mighty. For the 2022 midterm elections, we will once again be contacting every AAPI voter in the state of Georgia. And we will also be expanding our reach by adding 5 more counties to our civic engagement field program based on growing AAPI and Latina populations in those counties. We'll be talking to AAPI and Latina voters in Gwinnett, Forsyth, Fulton, DeKalb, Cobb, Columbia, Clayton, Henry, and Chatham counties. And in particular, we will be prioritizing new American voters and voters who have been less active and less frequently engaged over the past several election cycles, because we know that these voters are the ones who are most often overlooked by candidates and by political parties. And of course, we will be doing all of our voter outreach, as we always do, in at least 5 different languages, because we understand how absolutely critical it is to talk to our immigrant communities in the languages that they prefer. Our work and our investment in our communities, of course, will continue beyond the 2022 election cycle as well. We know that building the type of inclusive and equitable Georgia that we would like to see requires sustained, multiracial, multi-ethnic grassroots organizing outside of big election years by our organization and several other community partners. And we look forward to continuing to do that work alongside those that are here today and some of our partners who are not present. I will now pass it on to Rebecca Pelham with Engage Miami. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fee. It's an honor to be here today. My name is Rebecca Pelham, she and her. I'm the Executive Director of Engage Miami. Engage Miami, we build the power of young voters across South Florida, from Miami-Dade through Broward to Palm Beach, and that would not be possible without the support of folks like the Vote Your Voice initiative. And so we're so grateful not only to be in community with everyone on this call, but for the support that allows us to go deeper, to do our organizing work year-round, and to register, educate, and turn out every young voter across South Florida. There's a lot of myths about young voters, that they're apathetic or don't care, and that is so far from the truth. And we know that because we are out there talking to and engaging young folks every single day. We believe deeply that we can make our communities sustainable, just, and we can advance democracy where every vote counts and every voice matters. And we know that young voters in Florida matter deeply. The Youth Electoral Significance Index, YESI, which is put out by Circle, which studies young voters, lists Florida as a top 10 state where young voters can make an impact if we have our voice heard and our votes count. That's why organizations like Engage Miami and our partners fight for voting rights every day, from the local to the state to the national level, making sure that our districts reflect the diversity of our population, that our campuses are early voting sites where every student can cast a ballot, where those who had their rights restored through Amendment 4, which was passed in 2018, that promise comes to fruition so that people are not blocked from casting their ballots due to prior convictions or records. So we are out here every single day developing leaders on and off campus. We have an amazing fellowship program with student fellows who are registering their peers, talking to their faculty, talking to their friends. We know that young voters are not in isolation, that we are deeply embedded in our communities, that we talk to our family members, we talk to our teachers, and together we are the force that is changing the future of what civic engagement can look like, to be more equitable, to be more reflective. And so we're deeply invested in developing the young leaders who are already making the changes we need today and investing in the future that we need for a just community tomorrow, the year after, and the generation after. We deeply believe in voter education. We know that so many young voters are ready to cast their ballots, but when they get there, it feels like a multiple choice test. And instead, we make sure that young voters know, okay, what does a mayor do? What does a US senator do? Why are these positions so important? Why are they elected every 4 years? What are term limits? What are incumbents? These kinds of civic knowledge that really schools should be making sure that young voters have access to, but we fill in that gap because we know that there's no reason that lack of access to civic knowledge should mean that folks are not out there casting their votes with confidence and with conviction. This year, because of the support through the Vote Your Voice initiative, we're expanding to Broward County and to Palm Beach. South Florida is one big metro area. We are all connected. We all face the same rising seas. We all face the same attacks on voting rights. We all face the same crisis with affordable housing. And so we are creating solutions and systemic solutions that we're advancing together, both at the ballot box and beyond as advocates and as community organizers. We're out there every single day, along with our partners, many of whom are supported through this initiative as well, registering voters, conducting that nonpartisan voter education, and making sure that young people and all people know that our votes matter and that we can turn each other out and that we can support each other and build a stronger community in doing so. We are especially excited. In 2018, we won additional early voting sites on college campuses in South Florida. So we're going to be making sure that every young voter is able to cast their ballots early, cast their ballots through vote by mail, or make a plan to vote on election day. We work really closely with our campus partners, with other partners who are conducting civic engagement, making sure that we're also using this opportunity to test our tactics and see what works best so that we continue growing and working smarter, even as we work harder, because we're going to do both because we know it's all on the line this year and it's all on the line every single year, whether it's local elections, presidential, gubernatorial, US Senate, Congress. Every single level matters, and we want to make sure that young voters know what's on their ballot and how they can make sure that that ballot counts. So that's why grassroots support year-round organizing and power building, that it's not just about a one-time transaction, but about really transforming our relationship to each other and to our power and to our community. That's what we're invested in, and that's what initiatives like Vote Your Voice invest in. So we are so thankful, not only for this supplemental funding, but also for the long-term commitment across the South, one of the most important, beautiful regions. And so I'm so grateful to be in community with all of you, that you're all here today. And with that, I will wrap up my remarks and I will pass on to Brenda Hyde with the incredible Southern Echo. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca. My name is Brenda Hyde. I'm the Deputy Director of Southern Echo based here in Jackson, Mississippi. And we exist to fight the racism that exists in all these systems that oppresses people of color and poor people. We are a nonprofit organization that's been around about 30 plus years in the state of Mississippi. And we exist in addition to help empower and co-power grassroots communities with the necessary tools and skills that they need to be able to impact public policy at every level of government. We are training and educating and working with our communities to not just be objects of public policy, but to become the architects of public policy. And so as it relates to civic engagement and voting, we know that voting is our voice. We know that voting is our power. In a state like Mississippi, where voting continues to be so hard and so difficult, when in 2022 it should be easy, that is not the case. So we are constantly collaborating with local community organizations and others to conduct voter education workshops across the state, stressing the importance of voting, the importance of having a voice, stressing power and participating in democracy. And that is so key and essential for our people, that we never give up on educating around the importance of voting. We have also been collaborating with local schools and churches and other stakeholders within the communities to do voter registration drives. And today, this year alone, we have registered more than 2,000 new voters. And that's essential. If we want to realize a real, true democracy, we have to get the masses of people registered to vote and actually casting their ballot if we want to get even close to a real democracy and experiencing that. We also have dedicated field staff, partners, and canvassers across the state and about 55 counties that's distributing voter education materials, that's talking to voters and potential voters, just inspiring and motivating them to actually go out and vote. We know we're still in a pandemic, so that's challenging. But we have to do what we have to do. And what we have to do, we know, is to cast our ballots. If we want to change policy, circumstances, and conditions in which we find ourselves and our communities, we have to participate in democracy. And so that's what we're doing across the state. And we know to reach the masses of people that we want to meet, we can't do this alone. And so that's why collaboration is so essential and so important. And that's why we are collaborating with all the stakeholders who want to engage and participate in changing this country by really getting the masses of people voting and participating in democracy. And so we are so honored and so thankful for the Vote Your Voice grant, because it has enabled us to be able to go into these 55 counties and really have partners and field staff and canvassers on the ground, meeting, talking with the people, sharing, caring, educating, inspiring, motivating, and giving hope to our people so that they participate in the upcoming election. So thank you again for the grant, and I'll turn it over to Alicia.
Thanks so much, Brenda. I really appreciate it. I noticed we skipped Ashley. Ashley, we see you. Thank you.
Hi.
Ashley Shelton.
Hi, Ashley Shelton here with the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice here in Louisiana. And we are the civic engagement table for the state. And I'm, proud to lead this table that is anchored by base building groups who have specific content issue area, whether it be criminal justice, housing, reproductive justice, or juvenile justice. We have, that deep content leadership from our partners. We are so thankful to Vote Your Voice for this opportunity and this grant and these resources, because it allows us to continue to do our work, to talk to voters throughout the state of Louisiana. One of the things that we know is that when we do get out the vote work, that if, once we decide how many people are in our universe, we know that we can turn out 60% of our universe to actually vote, which also tells us that no one's talking to Black and other voters of color in our state. And so these resources allow us to do that. We often say, and what COVID has proven to us in the last 2 years is that, that basically voting is a social determinant of health. If we are not actually working with and engaging with the leaders that decide whether we're safe at school, safe at our jobs, whether we have access to healthcare, then we are in trouble. And I think that played out in many ways in the last 2 years. And it's an opportunity for voters to truly reconnect with their agency as a voter and the power that they have as a voter to make different choices, to make the choices that actually put candidates in place that are going to center the issues that people care about and that are necessary to change our communities. One of the things that I am very proud of this year is the work that we've done on redistricting. It has been a difficult fight. I'm proud to say that, however, we had historic and unprecedented participation in our redistricting process. This was the largest citizen participation that we've ever had in a redistricting process in the state of Louisiana. We engaged and had the voices of over 1,000 Louisianans participate throughout the process to have their voices on the record. We built a strong record, and we're on the precipice of actually realizing a second majority minority House seat before it was stayed by Supreme Court Justice Alito. And this is important because Louisiana has the second largest Black population in the country. And to not have the ability to have our voices effectively and fairly seen and shown through our congressional map and also our state maps, many maps that we're all in court for currently. But this congressional map is a powerful moment for us. And we are so proud to stand with Alabama Forward and our family in Alabama, as well as North Carolina, to say that we're going to hold the line, that we're not going to allow 60 years of progress, fighting, and advocacy and law to be undone because our country is becoming more majority minority, and nowhere more specifically than in the South. And so as we prepare for this fight, it is exciting to be able to stand hand in hand with our partners across the South. And then also too, with these resources specifically, because of the very racially motivated response that we receive from our legislature, one of the things that they can do is gerrymander and neuter our voices at the state level and at the House House and Senate, and maybe even at the local level. But what they cannot do is neuter the voices of the 42% of Black and other people of color and voters in this state. And because they can't neuter those voices, we actually can choose the next senator for the state of Louisiana, as well as all of the statewide offices that will be on the ballot next year. The thing that we're really excited about is that we've mapped every single unregistered voter, as well as every infrequent voter that is in fear of being pushed off the rolls. And we will use these resources this year to seek out, and we've also geo-mapped all of those voters across the state so that we can specifically and intentionally reach out to every single voter of color in our state that is unregistered or, in fear of being pushed off of the voting rolls. This is powerful work. It is the opportunity to make sure that the vote and the voices of African-American and other communities of color are heard, felt, and seen, and to send the message that we will not stand for our voices nor our vote to be neutered because they are afraid of the shift in power and voice, and that we are going to do what's fair and equitable. And so we are grateful to our partners. We are grateful for the investment in the South, because we know as goes the South goes the rest of the country. And if we figure this out and when we win, I'm excited to say one of the places we're tilling ground is in Congressional District 5, which will be the new majority minority district once we come out of the Supreme Court's decision in this late spring. And so we are tilling that ground right now to make sure that those residents in that new majority minority district will be able to elect a candidate of choice. And so I am hopeful. I remain and continue to have hope because many of the folks on this call today, the people of our state also remain hopeful, and we will realize our second majority minority House congressional seat. And so thank you for having me today, and thank you for this grand opportunity to be able to invest and change our state.
Thank you, Ashley. We appreciate the important work that you're doing, and really all of our panelists. I just wanted to lift up a couple of things that I heard because I just think I'm just so grateful. One, Fee, I heard you talk about the margin of victory and really shining a light on how AAPI voters, new immigrants, or immigrants and new Americans can make the difference in terms of our margin of victory. And then Rebecca, you talked about the young people in Florida being a top 10 state where young voters can make a difference. And then Evan, I appreciate you bringing you and Alabama Forward, committing to bring hope and bring energy and enthusiasm to the elections and in our voter education and voter outreach efforts. And of course, Rebecca, back to what you said about what civic engagement can look like. This is what it can look like. All of what you all are sharing is exactly what civic engagement can and should look like. Brenda, I just want to lift up what you said around Southern Echo fighting racism that exists across all of our systems and that exists to oppress people. Love the note about helping people become architects, not just objects of public policy. Then Ashley, closing it out beautifully with when we win. I appreciate that and your commitment to do what is fair. And of course, I'll always appreciate the Du Bois quote around "So goes the South, so goes the nation." So thank you to each and every one of you. We have some questions from our guests, and I'm going to call on folks to respond to those next. And Amy Dominguez with the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta, I'm coming to you with the first one. Can you recap how the $5 million in grants came about and how were the organizations selected?
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. Amy Dominguez Arms. I'm a lead consultant for Vote Your Voice. So we're just very grateful by the commitment of the Southern Poverty Law Center's board of directors to continue to allocate additional resources to this program. There was really a recognition in providing additional resources this year that we had already, through Vote Your Voice, provided 2-year grants last year. So carrying through this year to 55 organizations across the Deep South for their voter mobilization, voting rights advocacy work, And yet we know of, in particular, in light of new barriers to voting that we're finding, and just the challenges in mobilizing communities to exercise their rights to vote, that more resources were needed. So we made this offer of providing supplemental additional grants to current grantees. We reviewed applications and made grants to 23 additional organizations, 5 of whom are represented here. And in terms of the criteria, throughout, Vote Your Voice has prioritized organizations that are deeply rooted in the communities where they're working, that have trust and relationships with these communities, that have a track record of nonpartisan voter education and outreach, and have a commitment to both tracking the work that they do and sharing the work and the lessons learned in partnership with others, because we know it's going to take a network of organizations in relationship with one another to move the needle on achieving a fair and equitable democracy in the South. So that's a little bit about how the resources and how we selected organizations, but if there's follow-up questions, happy to answer them.
Appreciate that, Amy. Thank you so much. We wouldn't be able to do this without your support and guidance. Fee, I'm coming to you for the next question. What challenges have the 2020 elections posed on voter mobilization efforts?
Thanks for that question. I'm actually not, it's such a broad question. I hope that I'm answering it correctly, but I think one thing that we saw in Georgia specifically is because the 2020 election showed that so many communities of color had such significant power and historic turnout, then one of the things that we're facing is that election reform in our state that has really taken cuts to absentee by mail voting and also made early voting more challenging as well. And so we are facing some of those challenges where every time our communities turn out in a big way, then there are greater efforts to suppress the vote. And so we have to constantly be, I think, nimble and have to make sure that our communities are educated on some of those changes with voting.
Thank you. I think you did a great job answering that question. Do any of the panelists want to add? Anything to add? Feel free. All right. I'm going to come to you, Brenda, with this next question. And please, if you don't have a response, that's fine. We can, I'm sure that the other folks on the panel could attack the question as well. How are the organizations handling sweeping election laws implemented by the many states following the 2020 election? How are you all managing these new election laws? We'll start with you.
I mean, I think for us in Mississippi, voting has always came very challenging and difficult for us. And so for the African-American community in particular, it's like we're always expecting pushback and challenges. And so our work never changes, really. Our work to continue to educate, to continue to motivate and get people involved in talking with their state representatives, their state senators, and trying to get them to pass pro-voter legislation in the state. It's been our work ongoing. And so the elections challenges and laws didn't really change that. Here in Mississippi, we don't have automatic voter registration. We don't have early voting. We don't have same day voting. So for us, it's about fighting these other voter suppression tactics, like not having enough voting machines in precincts, having people wait in long lines, or making sure our people have a valid photo ID to vote. Those have been our issues, and they continue to be our issues. I guess as our state continue to see all these election laws passed in other states, it does not help us get any closer to getting what we call pro-voter legislation in the state. But as far as the work in a state like Mississippi, it continues to be the same type of work. And so we just have continued, as I said, to make sure our people are educated about those laws. They have a valid photo ID, and if they don't have it, we help them to secure a free one from our circuit clerk office, and then just make sure they get to the polls and vote.
Thank you, Brenda. I really appreciate that. And thank you for staying in it and showing us, reminding us that it's long-term work. I think, Rebecca, you mentioned that as well. Would you like to comment on what's going on in Florida with respect to these new laws?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Florida has, at the state level, put in place a lot of barriers that we've seen over the last legislative cycle. I think for us as an organization, what we try to do is make sure that young people know that they can cast their ballots, that what they're seeing in the news is often perhaps intended to create a culture of fear. I know that very recently there was a lot of press around just a very few cases that had to do with voter fraud that were, I think really designed to create confusion and fear amongst voters. And so what we do is make sure that folks know their rights, know what our voting rights are, that young people are helping each other get that information. And as an organization, it means that we just have to be exceedingly careful and really work with our partners like at State Voices to make sure that any new laws that come into effect that impact us, that we know what they are and can incorporate them into our program. This year, folks who had signed up for vote by mail in previous years will still be able to use that vote by mail registration, but going forward, we're going to make sure that people can still access vote by mail, and they might have to re-register every 2 years. So we make sure that we stay up to date on what's being done at the state legislature. We make sure that even though there is a lot of news, we make sure that we cut through the misinformation and provide the voter education, that people know their rights, and that we're out there supporting election protection volunteers who are standing outside of polling places when people do have questions, to make sure that they know how to get to their polling place, what ID to bring with them, how to cast a provisional ballot if anything does come up. So we believe that education is the best antidote to misinformation, but we do work very hard to stay up to date on the constantly changing legislative side, especially as Florida puts in place mechanisms like an elections police at the state level. We want to make sure that we are protecting our nonpartisan voter engagement and education, and being really aware of what's going on, and making sure our communities are also aware and engaged in this constantly changing landscape that is so often designed to especially impact and hurt communities of color in Florida.
That's exactly right, Rebecca. Thank you so much. I mean, you just lift up all these things around kind of why we need an initiative like Vote Your Voice. You hear the question often from the right around kind of why people can vote. It's easy to vote, but we know that it's not. And so you all are doing the very, very hard work of breaking through not just misinformation, but actual disinformation that is meant to keep people from voting. Ashley, you talked about the shifting demographics that are producing a new majority, and we know that those shifting demographics are the reason why we're seeing some of these states change their laws with respect to voting. Would you like to comment?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's absolutely right. This is about power and who has it. And one of the things that I'm really proud of in Louisiana is that we've actually expanded voting rights for the last 2 years in our state, and had to fight like hell to do it. But part of it, part of what happened when COVID, hit, we were able to successfully win a lawsuit against the Secretary of State to make sure that voters could access the absentee ballot because they had underlying conditions. And so those underlying conditions were allowed to stand for the presidential election in terms of, residents being able to request an absentee ballot. And then we just kept building from there. And so we've expanded early voting for presidential elections because we saw such long lines and the impacts on people's health standing in those long lines. And then we've also mandated that the Secretary of State also put any polling location change on their website within 48 hours of any election and or change to that polling location. And then I'm also proud to say that also at the local and municipal level that we've been expanding polling location sites in different parts of the state where you had, Shreveport, which, for example, which is one of the, top 3 metros in the state of Louisiana in terms of size, only having one early voting location in the whole city to serve several 100,000 people. And so being able to have those wins and continue to push up against this is important. And we know that as much as we push there, they're also still continuing to push back. And but we're here to stand and fight, and resources from Vote Your Voice and other funders help support us stand and hold that line. And we also have several study commissions right now at the legislature where we're looking at expanding and extending disability access to the polls. And what we understand is through our election protection program that, we are, woefully underserving people in our community, voters in our community that have disabilities. And, a wooden 2x4 isn't enough for someone's wheelchair to get up a broken ramp or broken concrete that, that could have dire consequences for them if they were to fall over or be unassisted. And so we are looking at many things as we continue the fight for expanding voting rights in our state. We, with our partner Vote, successfully re-enfranchised formerly incarcerated people a couple of years ago. All of these things are major steps. And then voters continue to do the work to make it even easier to access their vote, so that now they don't even have to go through, probation and parole. They can go through very much so like a regular citizen to be able to access their vote as they should be, because they've served their time and made and their debt to community. And so there are certainly, again, several negative policies that we able to kill. This governor did veto several terrible policies that we advocated around vetoing. And so, the fight still continues, but I'm happy to say that we've had some successes around expanding voter access in Louisiana.
Thanks for lifting up those successes, Ashley, and more importantly, for doing the work that brought about the success. Thank you so much. Evan, I'm coming to you. I'm in Montgomery also, as you know. What's happening here?
Sure. I was just putting an answer in the chat. So one person asked about policies that were passed this past session. And what I said is there wasn't a net change in terms of what people have access to here as far as ballot access, but we're at the bottom. So the things that Brenda was saying about the history there, that's where we are as well. So there wasn't a lot for them to take back because there were many things that hadn't been implemented here. But there was one particularly concerning piece of legislation that was presented by one of the current Secretary of State candidates, who will, in all likelihood, is in a very strong position to win that race. And this was actually the legislation would have prohibited basically nonprofit organizations from partnering with local counties to fund the expansion of absentee infrastructure. And this was in direct response to, I believe it was a Zuckerberg Foundation. So from Meta and Facebook, they were working with the county to supplement, the budget that they receive from the state, which is inadequate because of our tax system here. And this particular, who was a House representative at the time, proposed legislation that would have criminalized that and prohibited it. So it didn't, fortunately, it was too far to the right for where our legislature is, which is saying a lot, but it's also a harbinger to pay attention to as far, foreshadowing of what's to come, because again, this person is the most competitive candidate for our Secretary of State seat. And that's just continuing that trend of seeing folks in strong positions to occupy those seats going into November. So that's something that we're definitely very serious about, because in the past here in the state, when we've had folks in U.S. attorneys' offices or other arms of us, state government, who have a particularly and uniquely antagonistic relationship towards, civil rights work and voting rights work, things tend to get very interesting. And we're trying to do what we can to make sure that our members have resources they need to really have the infrastructure organizations need to survive those more turbulent times.
Thank you, Evan. Thanks Alabama Forward for being here for us. We appreciate it. Did I get everyone? Are there any other comments before I go on to the next question? Okay. Beyond funding individual organizations for their voter mobilization and voting rights advocacy work, what else do you hope Vote Your Voice achieves? I'll pick up on what Frank said in the introduction, and some of what I think I heard each of you say is that people's right to participate in their democracy, in their communities, to lead and guide their communities is a fundamental right, right? So, of course, SPLC is humbled and honored to be able to offer the funds, but more importantly, you're working to educate people across communities, young people, people who have been, as you said, Brenda, subject to the racist practices across all our systems. You are giving, I believe that y'all are giving people life and hope in the work, through the work that you're doing. So that's how I would answer it. Fee, I can come to you if you like. What do you think? Oh, is she frozen? Maybe.
Evan has his hand raised.
Oh, there you go, Evan. Sorry.
Hey, that's okay. I was gonna throw in, I think when we look at tactics that tend to work in this country is things that really create a narrative or a mythology universe for civic engagement. So if it was, on the other side of political spectrum, if you have birtherism or Stop the Steal or the sort of the narrative of the South before the Civil War, all of these things, you have government, civic, pop culture, religious. There's an echo chamber that people exist in, to where it's not only do they go and volunteer, but that you eat that, you think it, you sing it. And I think for what we're trying to do, particularly now, all of our organizations are working against both the dissatisfaction of the people in our communities with the failures of democracy, and then an aggressive assault that wants to replace multicultural democracy with a sort of religious white supremacist authoritarianism. And so in order for us to be able to survive and to compel people to have hope and to continue to, acknowledge the failures of the democracy, but also push to expand democracy's gains and its potential, we have to have a hopeful narrative that exists across a number of platforms and sectors of life to offer to people. And that takes innovation, that takes time, that takes coordination, all of that takes money. And so, one of the things that I hope for is this support can infuse our ability to continue to grow those types of that storytelling, and to grow our ability to support each other and to cross promote our work at the grassroots level and also at the regional level.
Thank you, Evan. That was beautiful. Ashley, you're gonna have the last word. Go for it.
Yeah, no, and it is a deep connection to what Evan just shared, which is the reality that I think, what we're doing is creating political homes for people that is bigger than a party. It is bigger than bigger than a politician, because if it was just about the politicians, I think that folks, would have continued to be discouraged, because even when we think we get it right and it's the right candidate, saying the right things, oftentimes they fail us, right? And so this is about creating spaces where community can come together and create deeper accountability, where they can talk about what it means to actually be a leader for their community, within their community. And I think that one of the things that I'm excited about is that, Vote Your Voice, State Voices, and so many of the other partners that we work with, truly have given us the ability to create political homes that allow folks to believe in something much deeper than just the current political infrastructure, but to believe that they do indeed have, their vote is their voice, is their power, and feel really hopeful about that. And I think that it is also the hope that drives the work that we continue to do, that at the end of the day, they understand that this isn't about today or even tomorrow, but this is a long-term fight, and that we have to build within this political home, the things that we need to be able to ultimately be where we want to be. So I just wanted to piggyback on what Evan was saying.
Appreciate that, Ashley. Thank you. Frank.
So just two things that I think is just really building on what folks were saying. I think for us, the bigger picture, it's in the name, Vote Your Voice. It's about people. It's about empowering individuals to have agency in their lives, in their own community. So for us, it's really there. And I'd paraphrase Amanda Gorman, who talked about our democracy being unfinished. And we are in the process of trying to finish our democracy or make it a more perfect union from my perspective. And the other idea of this, hope is a conscious decision, right? And I think we are all grappling with that right now. And a quote I heard recently that captured it well is this idea that hope is the conviction that despair would not have the last word. And that is what we are focused on, is how do we focus and bring folks together and empower them.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I have hope, and that's because of each and every one of you. Thank you so much for this wonderful briefing. Thank you for sharing all that you're doing. Thank you for your passion and your commitment to communities. It's inspiring. I really, really appreciate it. I want to thank the media guests for joining us today, and I encourage you to lift up these stories across the South about what is happening in the South to ensure that each and every person, it plays an important part in creating our inclusive democracy. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kevin. Appreciate you all very much.
Yeah, so on behalf of the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta and our special guests, we thank you again for joining us. For any further questions, please email press@splcenter.org. Each participant will also receive a link to the recording and a transcript. And with that, we can close the briefing. Thank you all and have a great day.